Welcome everybody to the Wilton Report Live. This is the Policy and Properties edition of the Wilton Report. And so again, why would you tune in if you run a business, if you're moving here, if you're thinking about moving here, if you live here and you want to know the direction of the town? We literally have somebody, for lack of a better description, that has the inside track or the inside seat as to what's happening. So again, the town is changing. There's so much change happening as it is every year in every town. And we want to talk about who's in the room when housing and development and infrastructure and all that, all the decisions are being made. So tonight is obviously Councilman Cohen. Thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. And so just for everybody who's watching and who will watch this in the future, because more people watch this down the line than they do live, especially on a night when I was just saying like a tornado blew through Princeton. Yeah. You sit on committees covering affordable housing, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The planning and redevelopment, finance, traffic safety, transit, stormwater, and the planning board. Is that fair?
All of those things are correct. Yes.
And so welcome to the Wilton Report. And for those of you, I think I'm correct in saying this, like you have like a morning and afternoon avocation that you perform in Princeton, right? Is that correct? Like we can find you every day at a certain spot at a certain time?
Well, I am up for re-election this year, and I can be found at Blue Bears Cafe on Wednesday mornings from 9 to 10. And that will continue at least through the general election in November, because quite out of the ordinary, we actually have a Republican who's running for council this year. So the race won't be over with the primary as
well, that's good, I think,
I think so too.
Yeah. Should have at least a little diversity of thought in Princeton. We're not known for that. And if we have diversity of thought, we sue each other over housing. So, right. So Wednesday morning, 9:00 at Blue Bears at the shopping center, right?
Yes.
And it's sort of, it's like an open, for lack of a better description, open mic. And people come in and chat with you.
Or I like to think of it as office hours.
Office hours. There you go. Okay. And I've interviewed multiple mayors on the broadcast, and I will say, right, on behalf of all the other armchair generals, as I call ourselves, right, and those, myself included, we kind of sit on the sidelines until something happens that we don't like, and then we complain about it. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about your journey into politics and how you got on the board and stuff like that. So let's kind of cover that, right? So how long have you been a resident of Princeton? Let's start there.
So we moved to Princeton in 1987, so almost 40 years ago, which at last, at least half the population doesn't consider me a newcomer, but I think the other half still does. I came for a job straight out of architecture school, and, I've had... my wife's a social worker, hospice social worker. Probably more people in town know her than know me. And 3 kids.
Not after tonight.
Right. 3 kids who grew up here, went through the Princeton public schools, and are now pretty fully launched into their adult lives. And we're lucky that 2 of them live in close enough distance that we see them weekly.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nice. So what got you into public service, otherwise known as politics? Like what made you want to do that?
Yeah. So, in the questions that you provided ahead of time, you asked them as 2 separate questions. So I'm going to answer it as 2 separate questions.
Okay.
What got me into politics was the 2004 presidential election. That was John Kerry versus George Bush running for re-election. And I wanted to help get John Kerry elected. And I got connected with the local Democratic club at that time and got very involved very quickly. I joined the executive board, became the treasurer. But my public service, I would say, started with joining the Pedestrian and Bike Advisory Committee. That was the very first thing I did connected to the municipality, and that was about 20 years ago. So I served on that the whole time until I actually got elected to council. But I did, subsequent to joining PBAC. I joined the planning board about 3 years before I joined council.
Got it. And I think that, I just interviewed the mayor of Lawrenceville, and he was saying, like he signed up for a small committee, and next thing you know, he was drinking out of a fire hose, and now he's the mayor of Lawrenceville. So it's just like, it does seem to be a natural progression.
Chris Bobbitt? Yeah.
What's that?
Chris Bobbitt?
Mayor Bobbitt. Yeah, absolutely. He was on a few weeks ago.
He's a good guy.
We were just chatting about it. He's like, yeah, I landed from California, got on this committee. Next thing you know, I'm the mayor. And so it seems to be that you put that one step forward and step forward and step forward. So, and again, why don't you explain to people the hours that you guys put in on the council? Let's talk about that, because I think all the armchair generals in the world, myself included, we like to go, oh my God, how can these people make that decision? Meanwhile, you've had how many meetings, how many times a year talking about the same topic that nobody shows up to. So how often does the town council meet in Princeton?
Council meets twice a month, typically with an extra meeting if we have too much work to get done in those meetings. But
and
I don't think
how long is an average meeting?
So they honestly, unless there's a contentious issue in front of us, they can be fairly short, like an hour, I would say, is the average meeting. They start at 7, and we're often out of there by 8 o'clock, unless it's a really hot topic. As compared to the planning board, which the meetings will often go 4 hours, and we won't be done, and we'll have to carry the hearing that we're engaged in to the next meeting, things like that. But there are a lot of, as you read my list, there are a lot of what we call council committees. Those are committees that focus on specific subject matter areas like transit or like finance, like affordable housing. And those tend to meet during the day. They're not open to the public. And, with all of those committees that I serve on, and several of them meet at least weekly or even twice a week. So, I literally, it's a full-time job. I work 35 to 40 hours a week between those meetings.
I want to focus on that.
Yeah.
What's your compensation for doing this for the town of Princeton?
It's $10,000 a year.
$10,000.
So yeah.
Let's just be conservative and say it's 35 hours a week, right? Yeah. Conservative. And that's when you don't have the long meetings, and that's when things aren't contentious, and things always seem to be contentious. So
yeah. I did the calculation once a few years back, and I was making about $3.50 an hour. So
$3.
And I will say, Josh, I'm also a crossing guard, and that pays much better.
Well, I was trying to get there earlier, right? So I lived on Moore Street for a number of years, so I would always be like, I was the guy in the blue Audi waving at me because I couldn't get to my corner here on Nassau Street going past the high school, so I came up to your corner in the morning. So yeah. I think the phrase
you weren't
would be
too frustrated. Yeah.
What's that?
Hopefully you weren't too frustrated.
No, your corner was the way to go. It was the only way to get to work. So, all right. So let's kind of transition a little bit. And I always think it's a good idea, because I think if you asked 99% of the people in Princeton, they have no idea how the mayor and the council works. So why don't you explain strong council, weak mayor for the average Princetonian who has no idea what that means in terms of the council?
Sure. It's pretty straightforward. So we have the borough form of government in Princeton that's known as a weak mayor, strong council. And what that means is that, the mayor runs the meeting, but he only votes when there's a tie amongst the council members. So generally the council members are the ones who make policy, because we're the ones who adopt ordinances and so forth. And it's a rare occasion, where something comes to council where it hasn't been well enough vetted that we sort of know it's gonna pass. So the mayor doesn't get a chance to vote very often. And then
That's what he said.
also, the council committees that I was talking about that meet during the day with the specialty areas, because they're council committees are generally populated just by council members. So there are a few ad hoc committees that I'm serving on, like the committee that's working on historic preservation guidelines adoption, that the mayor is on that committee. And I could give you a couple of other examples like that, but for the most part, and that's another thing that makes it a strong council, because for those who are fans of the play Hamilton, there's that song about being in the room where it happens, and that's mostly the council members.
And that's why we're here. So what is the council, or I should say, what control does the council have? Like, what authority does it have?
Yeah. So in trying to give you a meaningful answer, prepare for this, what I'm going to say is just, we do have a lot of authority. People hear the term home rule a lot in New Jersey. We have like 535 municipalities, and people bemoan the inefficiency of home rule, which means that all those individual municipalities get to make a lot of the decisions about what goes on in their town. It's land use, which I know you're very interested in and will be a large part of the focus of this, but it's police powers as well. Sort of things like, needing to have a license for your dog, and sort of disorderly what constitutes disorderly conduct, and just all kinds of things that are subject to ordinance. So There's a lot. Yeah.
So what does the council not control? Like, what would be some of the things that people go, oh my gosh, these guys in the council, and you're like, what are you talking about, man? That's not even us.
Right. So one of the things that we run up against most frequently is state and federal regulations that overrule us. And I'll give an example. A lot of people right now in town, with concerns about traffic safety, and seeing how well the four-way stop sign that has recently gone up close to my house at the corner of Jefferson and Terhune has had a really positive impact. So people are sort of saying, why don't we have four-way stop signs everywhere? And the problem is that the state motor vehicle regulations don't allow it. Basically, they're fairly strict rules. You're not allowed to use stop signs for speed control, which is a lot of what people like about them, is if you have them every block or two, people can't get up ahead of steam. They have to meet warrants for how many cars are passing through the intersection and stuff like that. So that's, I would say, the biggest thing that constrains what we can do is when the state or the federal government have regulations that supersede. But, a little bit lightheartedly, I also want to mention, obviously, acts of God, we don't have control over. So when we have a big storm like Ida, and residents are unhappy because they got flooded, not a lot we can do about that. We can try to plan for it, but out of our control. And the other thing I'll mention is individual behavior. So
you're not responsible for every single person that lives and comes through Princeton, David. That's unbelievable for you to say.
Right. We pass ordinances to try to control individual behavior, but if we overreach, if we try to do too much of that, people just ignore the rules.
Right. Yeah,
so I think that's something that's important for people to keep in mind.
Yeah. So what is let's talk about the difference between the town council and the planning board, so people have clarity on this. Because again, I think being the chief general of the armchair generals, that's me.
Yeah.
People complain, but they don't maybe know the difference.
Yeah. So the planning board's remit, if you will, is the master plan. So hopefully a lot of people are aware that couple of years ago, we adopted a new master plan, and it was the culmination of a multi-year process, a lot of public engagement, opportunity for people to say what they wanted Princeton to become in the future. And the planning board does that independent of council. However, really what it is a planning document, and it does not, council has to follow it, but we don't have to do everything that the planning board says. That it's sort of a visionary document. And in order for the recommendations in the master plan to actually take effect, they have to be adopted by council as ordinances, often zoning ordinances. Although again, the master plan talks about a lot of things besides the built environment, like transportation and, natural resources and stuff like that.
Right.
The other thing the planning board does is it reviews and approves individual site developments. So council really does not have anything to do with that except for to set the ground rules. But if an applicant has followed the ground rules, then they just go to the planning board to get the final, approval to do what they want to do. So those are the two major things the planning board does.
Right. And, it's obviously, at least as far as this show is concerned, housing is all the rage. And it's not just Princeton, right? It's across the entire state of New Jersey. We're just coming into the fourth round of affordable housing. And I'll just use the word, the new edicts are out from the state, meaning the towns have to hit certain numbers. And there's change afoot. And then obviously when change happens, people freak out, for
Right.
lack of a better description. So Princeton's changing, as it has inevitably since George Washington rode through here, right? Let's talk about affordable housing, right? It's a big topic, and we're not gonna burn up the entire night on it that we probably could.
Right.
You serve on the Affordable Housing Planning and Development Committee. Is that
Yes.
same?
Yep.
Okay. So, you have, at least from the outside in, you have a unique perspective as to how Princeton really, in my opinion, has gotten ahead of the state mandate for affordable housing.
Yeah.
Like, any insights you wanted to share on that, or, perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that, the current council is very embracing of the notion that there is a housing crisis in the country and in the state and in Princeton. And you don't have to go very far to find an op-ed columnist, talking about how, by the way, liberal blue states, blue towns, have been some of the worst actors when it comes to obstructing the construction of new housing. So I think we're really on board that this is important, and not just subsidized affordable housing, by the way. So some people in the audience, I don't know if they're aware, there are two basic ways to finance affordable housing. One is with tax credits, and usually that's applied to 100% affordable developments where every single unit that gets built is subsidized and rent controlled. Or there's what's called inclusionary, where a developer builds a project, 80% of the units are market rate and only 20% are subsidized affordable. And we've been very in favor of the latter, both because it tends to be less expensive for the town to do it with inclusionary development, but also because those developments are more integrated. So the residents, the affordable housing are not ghettoized, which can sometimes happen when it's 100% affordable development. And it's helping to solve the shortage of housing, that's for those who make more than the cutoff that would qualify them for a subsidized unit.
And I've done the math on other shows, so we don't have to get into the math tonight.
Sure.
I think one of the things, and this is, I think this is a natural human reaction. It's, when I moved here, these apartments weren't here. Why are they doing this? Right. And I want to talk about, I just want to give some clarity as to what you said. When Princeton or any town builds 100% affordable housing, meaning Princeton's going to build a building, and it's going to have 25 units, apartments, and it's going to be 100% affordable housing, they actually get credit for, and I'm making up the math, 35 to 40 units that the state says they have to build. But what residents don't realize is that they, as the taxpayer, as a result of the affordable housing edict from the state, they're 100% on the hook, tax credits notwithstanding, to build, finance, and maintain that community. Where if you spread it out and you say, look, we're going to build 100 units, 20 are going to be affordable, the builder's going to build it. You're not, as the resident, the tax-paying resident, you're not on the hook to share in that burden. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused and, they sort of get annoyed. But the town, I think, has done a pretty good job of trying to fiscally manage through this and do inclusionary housing. Now, I would say that, my thing would be like, can't we build a condo or two, right? Versus all the apartments, but, give people a chance to get on the equity ladder. But it is happening. The other thing too is these apartments get filled up. Like the Avalons and the Alice, they're almost at 100% occupancy.
Yep. And, I was just chatting with my colleague, Mia Sachs, about this yesterday. She's been hearing from developers that there is downward pressure on the rents. So, 100%. A lot of people sort of think that Princeton is in such high demand that the demand is totally inelastic. And no matter what gets charged for the rents, people will pay them. But it's not true. These developments that, a bunch of them all going up at the same time, they've been having to compete on rent to fill up.
We manage close to 200 units, right, through our property management company.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with my partner in that business yesterday. I said, look, we gotta get on the phone and have some calls with our landlords. Like that 1974 kitchen that sufficed for 25 years and nobody cared, it doesn't cut it in this market, because for $1,000 more, right, $2,000 more, and I split it amongst a couple of roommates, I can go to the Alice and I get a gym. And I can walk and get my food. Like I can be on the little bus and be at the Dinky. Like, when I first went into the Alice myself, I was like, wow, this is really nice, So yes, we do see downward pressure on rents. I think it's like the commercial market, like the Class A market in the commercial space is booming and is almost 100% occupied. It's the B and the C stuff that nobody wants because it's just not that nice. And there's enough A grade commercial space for people to take. It's the same thing in the rental market, in the residential rental market in Princeton, that we're seeing ample supply. The great stuff gets rented quick, and then there's downward pressure and pressure on landlords eventually to either sell or reinvest in the property. Hopefully, not all of them like to do that.
Yeah, markets work.
Markets work if there's a market. Yeah, markets work for sure. So what would you say to a resident who says, this doesn't feel like Princeton anymore, which, by the way, drives me crazy, but we hear it a lot. So what would you say to that person? Because you've been here 40 years.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, I'm hesitating because
you can think
I'm
through your head.
trying to decide whether I should say what I'm tempted to say or what I would actually say. But the basic point that I want to make is that, and this was in my campaign slogan the very first time I ran, 10 years ago, is that change is inevitable, and that the best we can hope for is to manage change so that we get change that we want instead of change that we don't want. And I would argue that over the 40 years that I've lived here, we've been getting change that we don't want. We've essentially been trending towards becoming a golden ghetto, where the only people who could afford to live in Princeton were bankers, and medical specialists and stuff like that. And when I moved here, my kids' teachers lived in Princeton. When I moved here, maybe half the police force were actually Princeton residents. That, it's no longer possible. And so what I see, when I hear it doesn't feel like Princeton anymore, to me, it does. We've lost that socioeconomic diversity and that sort of coherent community that is made up of all of the contributing members of the community. People who work here can afford to live here, and so that's the change that I don't want. And in order to not have that kind of change, we have to have more housing. And in that instance, things superficially look different, but I think we can hold on to the character of the community, which is the most important thing to hold on to.
Right. And, when it's ironic because it was, good old Mount Laurel, right? And they had exclusionary zoning, like you said, and now the whole state is
Paying the
being
price
fixed as a result of that zoning. So it wasn't long for this world that version, the golden ghetto, right? So
Right.
Let's talk about like development that's happening in Princeton in the zones. I'm not going to pull up the map. I've showed the map on different episodes. It seems that it's the town's intent to allow or to promote development, obviously closer to Nassau Street, closer to transportation, along the shopping center corridor, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially smart growth, right? It uses existing infrastructure instead of sprawl and keeps the growth in areas that are already developed. And that has environmental benefits. It also has benefits in terms of livability, because if you can bike or walk to daily destinations, you're going to be healthier. You're not going to be stuck in traffic. I can't wait till we talk about traffic. But
We could just
I
go there now.
rarely
Just make
drive my
everybody
car
angry.
around Princeton. I have a scooter that I ride, and I don't get stuck in traffic.
Right. My son just bought an electric scooter, and I don't even want to let him have it. Like I'm with
Well,
you.
that's a whole nother conversation that we should have at some point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
safety is that my answer to one of your final questions about what keeps me up at night. That's what keeps me up at night is, when
And
we have.
it's a very relevant topic right now, obviously, with
It
the
is.
the middle schooler being killed, and then
Yeah.
just a slew of accidents, or I'd say it seems to be so profound in the last 12 months. So,
Yeah.
But we'll get to that tonight. We'll talk mostly about housing, not that
Yeah.
those things maybe are as a result of housing. So, when it comes to the denser zones, let's go. You brought it up. Let's talk about it. Right? There's going to be more traffic on Harrison Street, in and out of Princeton, Alexander Street, Nassau Street, Witherspoon Street, where all these new apartment buildings are being built, right? And soon to be townhouses at the shopping center and
Yeah.
on 206.
I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to challenge that statement, Josh.
Okay, so that's the perception. Oh my God,
Right.
how is Princeton going to manage this traffic? And by the
Yeah.
way, the roads are a wreck. We can't even drive here. Like people say that all the time, right? So
Yeah.
let's
Try doing it
challenge
if you think it's bad in a car, try doing it on a bike.
Oof, no, my back would not forgive me. So let's talk about the perception or misperception of traffic. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So the point that I want to make is that Princeton has this enormous imbalance of in commuters versus out commuters. My understanding is we have about 27,000 daily in commuters. And if we can get some of those folks who are coming in from out of town to move to Princeton in some of these new apartment buildings that we're developing or townhouses, that should actually reduce the traffic, especially the rush hour traffic, which is what drives people crazy. You know, if you want to try to drive out to Route 1 at 11 a.m., it's no big deal. It's trying to come in or out of Princeton on any of our major arteries, Rosedale, 206, Washington, Harrison. You know, it's a mess at rush hour, and that's those commuters. And if we can get some of them to move to Princeton, we could actually have a net decrease in traffic. So that's why I wanted to challenge that assumption.
So that would be, yeah, like working on the corner of Nassau and Harris Street, and I live right behind here at Queenston Commons, right? I do feel like there's more traffic. Again, that could be my old age, and I'm getting more of a curmudgeon, but
Yeah.
it definitely feels like it's a little denser.
Yeah.
Is there a plan? It's just kind of like, is it just kind of like, other than hoping that people move to Princeton in these different apartments, which I sincerely hope they do, is it just the kind of thing? It is what it is. We're doing the best we can. And I understand the council is doing the best they can.
Yeah. I mean, I won't say that. You know, part of the effort to make it easier and safer to bike and walk is also to alleviate traffic. And I'm really excited right now about an initiative to try and move our transit system from fixed route, you know, the loop bus. We're so excited we got a second bus, you know, so now we have an hour and a half loop that goes to the affordable housing developments on the edge of town. Then we have an express loop that only takes 40 minutes to, you know, go back and forth between the shopping center and the Dinky. But if you want people to ride a bus, you've got to have service, you know, every 15 minutes or so. I mean, nobody's going to use those buses, and I've ridden those buses, and they've been almost entirely empty.
Yeah.
So
when it came out, my reaction was, this is a horrible waste of money. And then my daughter started doing it, and I'm like, she's like, Dad, this is great. I'm like, okay, this is great. You know?
Yeah. But wouldn't it be so much better? And this is happening in several cities throughout the state right now. It's called transit on demand, micro transit on demand. And basically you replace those buses with a fleet, maybe 6 or 8 minivans, which are essentially a public Uber, and will pick anybody up wherever they are and drop them off exactly where they want to go. And they're doing it in Jersey City, they're doing it in Trenton, they're doing it in New Brunswick. And the average wait times are reported to be about 15 minutes from when you put the request in on your phone to when it picks you up. It's going to be, if we can do that, it's going to be such a benefit for our seniors who either can't drive or shouldn't be driving. And by the way, they're one of the strongest advocacy groups behind this right now. It might cost a couple of bucks to ride instead of being free the way the minibus is, but it'll cost less than parking.
Less than Uber.
And this could really help alleviate our parking demand. It's not only about reducing traffic, but also reducing the parking demand, which could be a fantastic thing, even for the drivers who remain using their cars, but it'll be easier to find a parking space.
Yeah, a little easier to find a parking space. You know, well, that'd be pretty interesting. I would say that seems a lot more logical than just have 2 buses sort of doing roundabouts around Princeton, you know?
Than to have...
Yeah, just have
it's more logical than having the 2 buses. Yes.
Yeah, just much more on-demand platform.
It's something that's enabled by technology, you know, by computers, which can prioritize and pick up passengers in the right order and drop them off in the right order. it's exactly the same technology that FedEx uses to deliver their package, or the packages, or Amazon does. There's this software now that optimizes routes, and it's really, we've got to take advantage when technology is actually helpful. We suffer when it's when it's a problem. So let's take advantage.
Like
when
my
it's
Wi-Fi about 5 minutes before I wanted to talk to you, it was a problem. So let's talk about development, and let's overlay development with, and you alluded to it earlier, some of the historic zones in Princeton. When I first started this broadcast, I did a broadcast, and I actually got a call from an elected official in Princeton saying, like, you got to take that down, because I said that the John Witherspoon neighborhood was clear evidence of redlining, and it wasn't like an original thought. I happened to be in a class to maintain my license, right? It was given by a lawyer. You talk about redlining, and redlining, per the legal definition, is an effort to keep a group of people in or out of a neighborhood, right? And I said, John Witherspoon neighborhood meets the definition of redlining. It's reverse redlining, but it's redlining. So, one of my bugaboos with historic housing is the extra layer and time, which then adds cost and expense to the consumer, because whoever's going to build that property, it's going to cost them more money to do it, because it's going to take longer, and it's going to go through multiple reviews and lawyers and engineers and all the other stuff. And I sent you a picture of, I think, of a house, right? Mm-hmm. And it was dilapidated, mold infested. There were 3 families living in it, but it was on a quadruple lot, right? Mm-hmm. So there's the main house, and you can do main house ADU on the adjacent lot, which went with the parcel, main house ADU. In any other part of town, you would have 4 units already built on that lot. Mm-hmm. In that neighborhood, which is dense by design, or was built dense by design, you can't go in front of the planning board until you go in front of this. Like, how is that in, like you said, in a housing crisis, which I don't really see being alleviated? How is that in the public good? That extra layer of scrutiny, cost, and time by people who don't even live in the neighborhood, right? Yet they get to tell you what color.
So we could do a whole show on this, Josh.
Let's do it.
But for now, I just want to say, I concede the point that you're making, but I also think when we're expressing concern for marginalized communities, we're supposed to listen to them and what they want to see. And one of your questions was, how do these historic districts get created? And it's virtually
I know
always
how that was created.
Yeah. But they're almost always the same way, where it's the property owners within the district who request it, right? So they were asking to have the burdens that you're talking about, and there's a reason for that. They like the character of the neighborhood, and this goes back to that question we were talking about earlier of how do you answer people who say, it doesn't feel like Princeton anymore. Well, historic preservation, first of all, those old buildings often have higher quality than newer buildings do. They need work, but the bones, the original construction is good. And there is a benefit to having neighborhood character. And I think that we need to strike a balance, right? Where we need to, and I think we've got it pretty good in Princeton right now. First of all, as an architect, I've brought multiple projects to the Historic Preservation Commission. This is before I came on council, when I had to stop practicing architecture in town. But when I was doing it, they would always sail through. And that was because we were trying to do something that was in keeping. And by the way, I think that on that lot that you were pointing out, that you did your opinion piece about, you could have done new house, new ADU on the vacant part of the lot. You could have done the ADU in the backyard and renovated the dilapidated house. If you didn't want to tear it down, you could have renovated it and built the 3 new structures. And if you had a sensitive architect who was being responsive to the context, that would have sailed through as well. So you talk about adding a year or two. It doesn't add a year or two if you're trying to work with HPC instead of compel them to do something they don't
Yeah,
want to do.
no, and I understand that. I just don't know that, 8-foot ceilings or 7-foot ceilings, from a product
Yeah,
perspective are in demand and they don't sell as well. So a builder's not going to want to build. Like, it creates this just constant friction, and they're, the sides are very intractable, right? The historic preservation is like, no, this is the way it is. And the builder's like, well, 7-foot ceilings aren't a thing anymore. Like, and by the way, houses in that neighborhood were not well built, right? They were not built for the a super luxe build. Some of them have stood the test of time. Some of them have not, like any other neighborhood. But it's just one of those things. Like, how do you speed up development? And I'll get in trouble for saying that, because there's people in this town that are suing us or suing the town others for speeding up development. So, but
So,
it's a tough
I'll
spot,
just, yeah. So one of the things, I hope it was on the list of things you mentioned that I've been working on, but for the last year and a half, I've been serving on a committee that's been working with a consultant to develop design guidelines for the historic neighborhoods. And I think this is going to be an incredible benefit to people who live in those neighborhoods, to help them understand better and be able to know ahead of time like these guidelines are going to describe all kinds of work that you can do to your house without having to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. It'll tell you exactly, what kinds of projects do require you to go to the Preservation Commission. So the guidelines should really help oil the process and make it a lot easier. Now,
if something were actually published,
we're never going to agree on, that you need 9-foot ceilings in the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood.
I'm not saying I do.
As a
I'm
realtor,
saying
you're going to want that, and as a historic preservationist, I'm not going to want that. I'm going to
the
say
investor who's going to spend the money wants to maximize their investment, right? So it's like I said, it's like this yin and this yang, and it gets mired down, and it's like I said, both sides are very intractable, because A, somebody wants to make money, and B, somebody wants to preserve things the way they were. How do you meet in the middle?
Yeah. So I think the design guidelines will help. I will also say that I've seen, since I've been in Princeton, there were 2 other historic districts that attempted to be formed. It was actually requested by the residents of the area. One is in the western section, and one was in the Deer Path neighborhood, if you know that part of town, which has or at least had a very, very consistent mid-century modern aesthetic and really high quality modern design. And both of those failed because they couldn't generate enough support amongst the residents of the district. Not enough people wanted it. So that's all just to say that it's a very high bar to create a historic district, but if there's enough desire for it, I think that it's okay to have a little bit of extra friction in those limited parts of town to preserve what is really desirable, about Princeton.
Right. So let's talk about everyone else's favorite topic, which is taxes, right?
Sure.
And again, being the chief general of the Armchair Generals, we love to complain about taxes, and I do spend a fair amount of time on the show talking about the breakdown of taxes, but let's just go that again. So Princeton collects $1,000. Of that $1,000 that it collects, how much does it actually keep to pay its own bills versus sending it to the county?
Yeah, about 210 to
Isn't that crazy?
$220 out of the 1,000 goes to the municipality. About 30% goes to the county, and just under 50% goes to the schools.
To the Board
So
of Ed, to the schools.
yes, to the board of ed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, people look at their tax bill, and again, we love to apply blankets to complex things, right? Blankets thoughts, the complex thing. Oh my God, my taxes went up. And then last year they voted for the board, right? And this year,
Yeah.
there's
But
always
I
like a
will
little
also
bit of a
say-
disconnect.
Yeah. The schools are operating under very strict caps on how much they can raise taxes. So they're rarely raising them very, very much. The county has had a couple of years of really significant increases. I think last year was 13%, and this year it's 6%. And the municipality we had a 5% increase, I think it was a couple of years ago. But we're really trying to keep it under the rate of inflation these days. So, we're part of the demographic diversity in Princeton is being lost because of tax increases.
Yeah.
So we understand that if we've got this agenda where we want to have missing middle housing, it's not going to help any if we don't have missing middle taxes for the missing middle housing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and again, it's, you alluded to it earlier that, the blue states, if you will, through zoning and planning and all the other things that are amongst the worst offenders, which have seen or created this incredible rise in property values, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you build product, like you just said, there's downward pressure on rents in Princeton.
Yeah.
And based on what I know is coming from a rental supply perspective, that is going to continue. So, will it force landlords to sell? I don't know. Not the long-time landlords have a great equity position. Maybe the junior landlords, if they're making X this year and they make Y next, they're like, well, it went up 40%. Maybe I'll sell it and I'll take the tax hit, right? But yeah, the taxes is a tricky thing. And I will say that having, interviewed Mayor Frieda a couple times and talked to people, I give the town council and the mayor incredible credit for really parsing every penny. I don't think people realize the level of detail you guys go to keep expenses low.
Yeah. When you hear that health insurance for our employees went up 36% this year, that gives it really underscores if we kept our tax increase under 3%, how are we doing that?
Magic.
Right. So we are very concerned about it, but I also, I don't want to, jump ahead, but you had some questions in about how the new development is impacting our financial picture.
Let's talk about it right now.
Yeah. And I think it's very complicated, but I think the news is good because basically the marginal cost of servicing the new housing units is not very great. We can add 1,000 new housing units and not even necessarily need to add a single police officer, right? We don't have to hire an additional snowplow driver. We still have the same number of roads. So there are a lot of costs that don't go up just because we're building more housing, but the tax revenues do go up. So what we're seeing so far is that the new construction is having a favorable impact on the municipal budget. But, we haven't done sort of we're in the process of trying to really fully understand why our surplus is going up. The surplus goes up when you have unanticipated revenues or you don't spend money that you thought you were going to have to spend. And our surplus has been going up at a rate that it hadn't done before. And we're still diagnosing why that's happening, but it's a really hopeful trend.
We would describe
And
it
I
as
think it's
progress.
partly because of the added units.
The revenue. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the revenue from those units. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, that's the pro and the anti-housing. And I always make an effort not to label. Like I don't really take sides. And people are like, why don't you take sides? I'm like, I'm not a policymaker. It's not my job. I just like to talk about housing. So it's like that.
Yeah.
Poor David. You guys literally, and I read articles about like the vitriolic level of what's happening with members of council. I find it upsetting. Like
Yeah.
it's horrible.
Yeah.
Like kids, like your peers' kids at school. They're rubbing on these kids. Like, really? Like, is that really happening? But apparently, it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Well, I try to avoid it by really honoring differing points of view. And I don't know if it's coming across in our conversation, but I really do value, like I value historic preservation at the same time that I value creating new housing stock. So
Right.
I think that I really see both sides of a lot of these issues. And, as a council person, I have to decide on a case by case basis how I'm going to vote. But I still am very happy to talk to anybody anywhere on the spectrum in terms of their opinions. Yeah.
So let's jump back to our favorite topic of transit, right? And parking.
Yes.
Like, is there? And I wonder, by the way, and I don't know this. This is an anecdotal thing. Since the Princeton Art Museum opened, I've noticed a definitive change in the volume of people in Princeton. I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but
there may be. I mean, it got a lot of press as a fantastic place to visit.
top place in the world.
Yeah.
Princeton, like amazing press. And like since that opened, it's like I feel like the downtown has almost gone through like a resurgence. And then is there a plan? Obviously with the buses and maybe the on-demand vans, for lack of a better description, we're building more housing. Is there any sort of plan like to say, okay, we are going to be optimized in 15 years from now? We've already thought through the housing, like Mayor Marathi, when I interviewed him in West Windsor, they planned the schools for this round of housing 20 years ago, right? Like they were looking ahead and going, okay, we have to build this because this is coming. Is Princeton sort of taking into account the development for transit parking? Is it part of the long-term strategy?
I mean, we are always looking for the potential to create more structured parking. In other words, like the park, is it Park Place? The parking the surface parking that's behind CVS on Nassau Street. It's municipal parking. Other property owners own pieces of it, but we're really interested in the possibility of doing a parking garage there instead of surface parking. This is a way, and if we can find other decent locations, I think there's been some conversation about the Chambers Street garage, which is on the corner of Chambers and Hullfish, is being structurally able to accommodate additional stories. So that might be another way to get some more structured parking in town. But, I worked a few years ago trying to revamp our permit parking regulations to try and help, lower income employees of downtown businesses.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah. That was, it's one of my great regrets that we didn't get that through. I had a fantastic committee of citizens from all the different neighborhoods, from the schools, from the businesses, and really working hard to collaborate, come up with a compromise solution. And then council got scared away because there was some vocal opposition to the plan. I think it was a mistake not to adopt it at that time, because I think we've got a lot of on-street parking that is walkable to the center of town. that is currently not able to be used by anyone. It
Right.
just sits vacant.
I was about 5 blocks away from Olive's, driving away from it, and I saw 2 employees, and I know because they had the Olive T-shirt, and I know they were walking to their car. Like, it was a
Yeah.
walk. It's like
Yeah.
a 15, 20-minute walk.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So there are a lot of, all of the things we've talked about are, it's like yes and. Each of those things is a potential solution to the parking issues. I think we're doing a good job trying to pursue all of those. And parking is something I'm a lot less concerned about than some of the other challenges, that we face, like some of the financial challenges of how do we keep taxes affordable for Princetonians. That's something that, you know, except for keeping an eagle eye on what we're spending, there are no magic bullets for that. Whereas I think
No.
for the parking, there are a range of solutions.
Yeah. So you look back on your time on the council, right? Like what was one of the hardest decisions you had to make as part of the town council? What would you say?
Yeah, so this will probably surprise you a little bit, but the decision whether to allow cannabis dispensaries was the hardest. And I'm not
Did you
saying
vote
that
for
because
or against it?
I ended up voting against it.
Against it. Okay.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify, it wasn't like an end of the world thing. Like if it had gone a different way, I thought the whole controversy was a little bit overblown, that it wouldn't make that much difference one way or the other. But what was interesting is we had more turnout at those council meetings than for any other topic. And everyone who would get up to testify had a different perspective. Usually when we have a big crowd at council, we have 50 people stand up and say a variation on the exact same thing. And this was such a complex issue. We had everyone who got up said something different. And processing all that input and figuring it out was the hardest vote.
Yeah. It seems to me like it's like any change, we're down the line a little bit with it, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be a big nothing burger.
Yeah. People can get their pot out on Route 1. We're
Yeah,
up in
like,
Kingston. We're losing a little bit of tax revenue as a town, but I think it was overblown.
Yeah, I think it was like once it turned out, and again, like not to stress the residents put you guys under, because Lord knows they were vocal about it, right? And
Yeah.
to me, like, if you say, okay, well, if there's a vacant storefront, doesn't, like, is it better than nothing? But
Right.
it didn't turn out to go that way. So like, no, I didn't lose any sleep over it, but it seemed
Yeah.
like in hindsight, it's just sort of like as soon as it passed, the air went out of the balloon. Everyone's like, all right, well, moving on.
Yep. Yep.
So when you look at the next 12 to 24 months, and by the way, I've kept you so long tonight, I appreciate your time.
Sure.
What are some of the big things coming down the road that you guys are going to be working on the council?
Yeah. So I don't think we've touched on the Westminster campus
No, we
yet.
really didn't get there yet. No.
Yeah, but that's big, and it's really
Yeah.
going to be taking shape over the next, as you say, 12 to 24 months. I'm really looking forward to a public process. People are frustrated they haven't had too much opportunity to hear what's been going on, but we've, like the proverbial duck, we're paddling as fast as we can under the water. It looks like we're serene, but we're working really hard to get it to the point where we can come to the community with some intelligible, actionable choices and information. So that's big. Working on the stormwater utility, we haven't talked about that as well. It's something that deserves its own, at least half a show. But
Half a show.
it's
And
it's
I don't think
really,
why don't we spend 60 seconds on that, because that's one that Westminster's a sexy topic, right? It's in the middle of
Yeah,
town. It's the hill. It's the building. It's park. It's all these things.
yeah,
We'll get to that. Let's talk about the stormwater. Like, why don't you explain like why this is an important topic for residents? I think they have
yeah,
no idea.
yeah. So the most important reason, so it's what a stormwater utility is it's a different way to pay for needed stormwater management improvements. And basically, instead of paying for them out of general property taxes, you assess a fee on property owners, varying depending on how much impervious surface they have on their property. So it's more equitable because people are being charged based on how much they're putting into the stormwater system instead of just how much their property happens to be worth, right? Secondly, it's a fee and not a tax. So our big nonprofits actually have to contribute to the stormwater management, like the university, the seminary, the Institute for Advanced Study. And that is going to really help spread the burden for taxpayers.
By the
So,
way, I think that was a stroke of genius, just for the record, like setting it up that way.
yeah,
I think nobody had any idea. Like, and again, I don't want to say these institutions go unscathed because they contribute and all that. I don't want
they
to even have
do.
that
Yeah,
debate tonight, but like, it was a stroke of genius on your guys' part to say, well, you know what? In this case, it's not a
yeah.
tax; it's a fee.
Right.
So you
And
know what?
then, I won't say it was our idea. I mean, this was enabled by the state legislature. About 8 years ago, they
Yeah.
enabled it as something that towns could do. And they're the ones who put that, uh, that wrinkle into it. So, but it's a great thing. And the third thing that's the benefit is that you can get credits against your fee if you make stormwater improvements. So this is a way to incentivize property owners in town to do some stormwater management, even if they're not doing a construction project. Right now, the only way that the town has any influence over any property owner to do stormwater management is if they're coming to the planning board, to make a change. But with the utility, we can actually incentivize people who aren't planning any change. We can give them a credit against their fee if they can do better on managing their own stormwater. So
Right.
it's a win-win-win. Classic. Really excited about it.
Yeah. I just thought that was a very smart.
Yeah.
It's a fee, not a tax. And I was like, oh man, that sailed over everybody's head. So I thought that was a
Yep.
very smart approach to it. So let's talk about the election. It's coming up, obviously. When should people be going out to vote for town council? It's imminent at this point.
It is. People who requested mail-in ballots, which is a lot of people, already have them. Some of them have already returned them. But they are due. They need to be postmarked by June 2nd. And primary day is June 2nd. So that is your final day to vote in person if you want to vote in person. But early voting, I think, starts on the 26th or the 27th.
26. Yep.
So there are a few locations around town where if you don't want to wait in lines on June 2nd, you can go ahead of time and cast your vote early.
Well, I wish you luck in the election. I really do. I will say genuinely because I've watched your career and applaud. I do really think that, like I said, I don't want to say the bad rap the town council gets, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what I'll say. Like, you guys take a lot of darts.
Yeah.
You take a lot of
Yeah.
rocks, a lot of tomatoes on that suit you wear to the town council meeting, and
Yeah.
I just think that people, don't realize the hours that goes into public service. And you said it right at the beginning. This
Yeah.
is a full-time job at $3.50 an hour, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And it's a level of love and commitment for the community of Princeton that I think in these debates that people have, housing or parking, whatever, I think
Yep.
to your point earlier, people lose the ability to communicate and respect each other's point of view. So
Yeah.
I do want to say thank you, right? Because the work that you guys do, I think, is amazing.
Thank
And
you.
as the chief general of the Orange Trail Generals, like, thank God you're doing it. You know, because
Thanks.
if it
Yeah.
wasn't for you
And
guys, we'd be
one of the
living in
questions
caves.
you asked, what's a big misconception of the
Yeah.
public about council? And I would say the big misconception is that we do it for the glory.
Dude.
Anybody who goes into it for that reason, because they want the prestige of being on council, does not last very long.
Glory.
You only stick with it if you're really committed to trying to make
Yeah.
Princeton a better place.
You guys work so hard. You're away from your families. You're taking time off from work. You're giving up your practice in Princeton. Like, people have no idea.
Yeah.
We just like to show up at the end and complain when we don't get it, when we don't get our way. Like, that's the nature, that's the human nature. But no,
Yeah.
I do applaud all the work that you do. I sincerely wish you good luck in the election. I hope it goes
Thank you.
well, and then, hopefully we'll get another chance and you come on and we'll just keep talking about what's happening in town.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Anytime you want.
I appreciate it,
Anytime
Councilman. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time tonight. I really appreciate that. And
Thanks for having me.
it's my pleasure. So again, thank you for everybody for tuning in, and for people tuning in the future. This has been Councilman Cohen, and we just spent time talking about a lot of stuff in Princeton tonight. And this is the Wilton Report. I'm Josh Wilton, and thank you guys, and thank you everybody for tuning in. See you guys soon.
Good night.